Hello, welcome everybody, and welcome to the second pre-conference webinar for Strategy Leaders Forum. Today's talk will be the middle manager's role in strategy implementation, and we are very delighted to have Robin Speculand, founder and chief executive of Bridges Consultancy, taking this webinar with us. Before I hand over to Robin and he begins the talk, I just want to remind everybody tuned in that there's only 3 weeks to go to the Strategy Leaders Forum in Dubai. So the 26th to 30th of April at the Address Dubai Mall is where you will find two leading global gurus of strategy implementation and execution. We're very much delighted to have Rita McGrath this year, who is currently a professor at Columbia University and also currently number 6 in the Thinkers 50 list of global management gurus. Also joining us will be Jerome de Flandre, who is one of the most influential thinkers on strategy execution in the world and has been very well received at previous editions of the forum. In addition, we'll have 4 hands-on workshops at the event and up to 30 presentations from regional and international strategy execution experts. So we do hope that you can join us, and the registration is right there, Strategy Leaders Forum. A couple of housekeeping things before we begin today's webinar. Firstly, the webinar is recorded, and you will be sent an email following the webinar, probably tomorrow or a couple of days after, with a link to the recording and the slides. So I know that question always comes up, so everybody who is here today will be able to view the webinar afterwards also. Secondly, there's a questions box you'll find on your screen. You can post questions as they come up, and Robin will be happy to answer as many as he can at the end of the webinar. Any questions that are unanswered during the playback, we will answer and post on the website. So please do type in your questions. Well, without further ado, let me introduce Robin, who is the presenter for today. Robin is a global pioneer in strategy implementation and thinking. He has published 2 international bestsellers on the subject, Beyond Strategy, The Leader's Role in Successful Implementation, and Bricks the Bridges, Making Your Strategy Come Alive. His work has been featured widely in the media, including BBC Global, CNN, CNBC, Channel News Asia, and many other reputed journals and strategy magazines. So, Robin, I'll hand over to you now, and yes, thank you very much.
All right. Rob, you can hear me fine? It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And what I'm going to have the pleasure of walking through is the manager's role and the challenges in implementing strategy. The question of the role of middle managers is one that is picking up with tremendous acceleration over the last couple of years. But before I delve into it, let me just step back a little bit. I've been working out of Asia, specifically Singapore, for the last 20 years. And over the last 15 years, I've been presenting and researching on strategy implementation. I left the banking industry back in 2000 with the singular goal of setting up a consultancy focused at implementation, because I noticed that organizations were struggling with this challenge. When I started the company, we were seeing so many organizations putting all their effort into the planning but failing to execute. Fast forward 15 years, where are we today? We have the conference in just a couple of weeks where great minds are coming together to share and talk about implementation, which just really shows how much we've evolved. And today it's recognized that a leader needs both the ability to craft the right strategy and the skill to execute it. And what's going to be my pleasure to cover over the next 45 minutes is what is the role of the manager in implementing strategy. But I'd like to first, in a few minutes, talk about the introduction, the challenges to implementation. I do a lot of work in the Middle East as well as South Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe, and the States as well as Australia. And there are some common problems that I'd like to share with you. To have a good strategy implemented well. Sorry, we would prefer to have a good strategy implemented badly. Why do they say that? It's based on the theory that at least if they have a good strategy, they are going in the right direction. They have a foundation that they can build on, and along the way they can tweak and adjust.
Hi, Robin.
In B, 20%.
Robin? Hi, Robin.
Yes.
It's Rob here. I just want to, your screen is actually showing two screens, not the full screen. Is there anything you could do that? We only see half the presentation.
Just give me 1 moment. There we go. Is that any better?
It's a bit better, but could you? Is it possible to? There you go. That's the one. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that, Rob.
Thanks. Great.
Why B? Some people say B because if they have a bad strategy but it's implemented well, at least then they are making progress. And they realize that if they can implement well, they can adjust and make changes that are required because they have the required skill sets. Now, what is the correct answer? The correct answer is B. And in the short time I have with you is to share with you why middle managers have to realize that even when they have a bad strategy, if they have ability to execute it, they will be more successful. In short, why is B the correct answer? Because even though in A we have the theory that a good strategy implemented badly will help us along the way and will make the tweaks when we recognize it's not working, in theory, yes. But in practice, organizations get caught up with the day-to-day issues and they don't have the time to be able to tweak and change the strategy. And as a result, it gets lost. And 6 months after the grand launch, it's back to business as usual. But in B, organizations who can implement well have the capability, skills, and tasks to be able to do what needs to be done to make the strategy work. And when the strategy is wrong, and here's the key word, they know. They know that they have to go back upstream and make the changes. So keeping it brief, B is the right answer, because at least when you can implement well, you know what's going on because you have the right resources in place. And on one final note, no leadership team starts off to have a bad strategy. Everyone thinks their strategy is good, but the only way you know is by executing it. But of course, the ideal situation is a good strategy implemented well. And the few companies who can develop a winning strategy with a successful implementation are the ones who will reap the phenomenal revenue benefits. Because excellence in execution is a differentiator in today's markets. Where we're all reading the same books, what differentiates is how we apply the knowledge. And when we are good at implementation, we really make leaps and bounds forward. But what about the role of a middle manager? That's our focus for this webinar. Well, let's put it into context. If the leader is responsible for developing the winning strategy, and it's the staff members, the people in the organization who successfully implement it, then what are middle managers doing? In a nutshell, the middle managers are the linchpin of implementation. They're the ones who hold it all together. They are the ones who translate the message, who make sure the right actions are being taken, who are constantly helping and supporting the people. They are the linchpin of the implementation. So a second question, why does implementation fail so frequently? Whatever research analysis you look at today, implementation is failing more often than it's succeeding. Part of the problem is poor communication, lack of measurement, we don't know what to do, unclear objectives, no resource support, or maybe no commitment. These issues you're probably familiar with. You're probably sitting at your desk going, yep, Robin, we know all this. But here's the $6 million question. If companies know why implementation is failing, then why is it still failing? What do we have to do different? So see if this is familiar. Here's the story of strategy execution so far. In organizations today, we have the vision, mission, and values. The vision, our future state. The mission, our core purpose. And the values, our guiding principles. Then we add our strategy. Our go-to, our plan, our big picture, how we're going to achieve the vision, where we'll differentiate from our customers. Then we apply the change management, and this will give us the results. Well, most people will agree with this. And when I have the opportunity in a room, most heads are, to present this, most heads are nodding. But here's the problem. It doesn't work. For 9 out of 10 organizations, it's not delivering. There's a problem. As Rob kindly introduced, a few years ago, I published an international bestseller called Bricks to Bridges, Make Your Strategy Alive. And in the book, which was based mainly on my research in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, I looked at why do some companies succeed and some don't? And those who are successful, what do they do different? And here's the key thing. Successful organizations in strategy implementation go beyond traditional change management as we know it. They don't apply a linear 1 to 8 or 1 to 10 process. Implementation involves various different steps, and there's no magic bullet. There's no simple plan. Now, for the middle managers, this is ambiguous. And their challenge, which I'm going to present in just a few minutes, is how they can translate this ambiguous approach into their everyday work. Because one of the critical reasons implementation fails is because middle managers don't know what to do. They're not given the tools or the resources to enable them to succeed. And when that happens, they carry on doing what they've always done, which is the old strategy. And the new strategy never gets off the ground. It fails. So let me pause for a moment because this is a critical juncture. We studied the organizations who were successful. We spoke to middle managers around the world, across 5 different continents, about what was working and what was not. We compared that with our notes from leaders and from staff members and our own client work. And here's what we identified. We identified there are 8 areas of excellence in execution. Now, these 8 areas that I'm going to share with you, none of them are going to be rocket science. All of them you're familiar with. So let me show them to you first. The 8 areas required for middle managers and senior managers to achieve excellence in execution is 1, focusing on the people, the business case, the communication, the measure, the culture, the process, the reinforce, and number 8, review. Now, what is different about these 8 things? From the research we've done, we've identified that it's not about doing 1 or 2 things well, but it's about doing all 8. And only the companies who address all 8 of the areas are successful. So, another question for you. What is it about these 8 areas? Well, there's one very strong underlying principle. If strategy is about making the right choices, which it is, which market should we compete in? Where should we invest in our R&D? How do we compete against the competition? What do we do to add value to our customers and our shareholders? It's about making a choice. If strategy is about making the right choice, then what is implementation about? Consider for a moment. What is implementation really about? And here's the crunch. Implementation is all about taking the right actions. It's about translating the strategy, the big picture, at 50,000 feet down to the frontline staff. Because senior managers don't implement the strategy. They're responsible for crafting, overseeing, and driving it through the organization. It's the middle managers working directly with the people who really take the strategy and have to understand and embark on translating it to everyone in the company. And how do they do that? Well, this is where the 8 areas of excellence come together. And the model we use with organizations around the world and governments, we call the implementation compass. The compass is a metaphor that says if the strategy is your map that shows you where you are and where you need to go to, the compass is the tool that tells you which direction to go. What is the right step? Or putting it another way, what is the right action for your managers to take so that the strategy starts to successfully be executed? It may sound straightforward, but this is where many, if not most organizations falter. As they start to roll out the implementation, they have no framework, no structure, no guidance, and the leaders and the middle managers and then the people struggle to adopt it. And when they struggle to adopt it, once again, it will fail. So we need to make sure that we are taking the right actions. And as I talk about the compass in detail and the 8 areas, I would like to highlight our experience with middle managers about what are the best practices that they should take. And one of the initial is that the middle managers need to be leading by example. They need to be the role model for the implementation across the organization. If the staff don't see their own boss engaged in the implementation, demonstrating the new behaviors and actions, they'll ask themselves, why should I? If my boss can't be bothered, why should I do it? So, the first best practice I'd like to share with you for middle managers to successfully implement strategy is they must take the right actions and be a role model across the organization. When Microsoft was rolling out its strategy a few years ago, it adopted this best practice where it highlighted the people who are role models inside the organization, and it said to other staff, if you want promoted, if you want a bigger bonus, benchmark yourself against these people, because these are the type of people we want in our organization because they think the right way and they take the right actions. Now, as I get to the halfway mark of the presentation, I would like to spend the second half identifying around the 8 areas of excellence for execution that make up the implementation compass, just what middle managers need to do differently in each of the 8 areas. So for each area, I'd like to do 2 things. The first is just explain the area and why it's on the compass and its relevance. And then secondly, the challenge for middle managers. Please, if you have any questions, then do enter them. And as we're going through the presentation, I'd be delighted to answer them for you. We've already had one just come in from Qatar. This is an image that normally gets a smile. What's the role of people in implementation? They're the ones who do the work. They're the ones who have to be out there taking on more work. Because what does strategy implementation really mean to your people? After the CEO's done the town hall meeting and the posters have gone up and the t-shirts and the fanfare, what does implementation really mean? More work. Because you have to work the old way and the new way. There's always a transition period. It may be 2, 3, in some companies, up to 10 or 15 years. And during that time, people are being asked to do more. And today, especially, I'm very familiar in the Middle East, one of the biggest problems is change fatigue. People are feeling burned out from one initiative after the other. So what is the challenge for middle managers? What do they need to do? They need to engage their people, because without the engagement, implementation will fail. Middle managers have to explain to them why the organization is changing, which I'll talk about in a moment, but they also have to give the people a sense of purpose. A sense of purpose is the #1 motivator of people at work in most jobs. Now, some of you will be sitting there going, rubbish, it's all about the money. Well, I encourage you to look at the research over the last 10 years. Money in many organizations today is number 5. Once you have achieved your Maslow hierarchy of needs, what motivates people at work more than money is a sense of purpose. And when you launch your new strategy, it's a phenomenal opportunity to put a sense of purpose into the work that people are doing. So middle managers, best practice number 2. Middle managers must not leave their people or their team to figure out what to do. They must give them the skills, the systems, the structure, and the security to succeed. And people look to their immediate boss more than anyone else. I'll say that again. People look to their immediate boss more than anyone else. Why? Because we know from research that people follow and pay attention to their immediate boss much more than, for example, a CEO or a senior manager. So the middle manager is responsible. They know the people in the team. They know the people in the department. They must identify what skills are required to implement the new strategy, how we can adjust the systems and the structure and provide the security for success. Now, moving around the compass at Northeast, the second area middle managers need to be aware of, and this really does fall on them, is the business case. What is the business case? The business case is why must we change? And middle managers have to create a sense of purpose, and they do this by explaining the business case. It also creates a sense of urgency. We need to do this. If you want to overcome the change fatigue, you have to explain to people why it's so critical that we adopt this new strategy. Simon Sinek published a book which many of you may have read called Start with the Why. And there was a lovely quote that I enjoyed in his book that said, leaders don't have all the great ideas. They provide the support for those who want to contribute. Leaders achieve very little by themselves. They inspire people to come together for the good of the group. Leaders never start with what needs to be done. Leaders start with why it needs to be done. Leaders inspire action. And Simon Sinek summed up beautifully what it really takes. Middle managers are responsible for engaging. The answers will come from the people doing the work. Now, one quick rule of thumb. When you're explaining the strategy as a middle manager to your people, don't overcomplicate it. Don't use all the buzzwords. This is the greatest strategy we've ever had. It will take us to new boundaries. It will move the markets. Our shareholder return will increase. It will allow us to enable and grow as we cross border. It's just buzzwords. You have to explain it. Well, I call it the grandma test. Would your own grandma understand the strategy? If no, then you failed to explain it. It has to be in a straightforward, easy to understand manner that your own grandma will understand. And let me just end the business case component with a quick example of some of the work we did. So how do you take the business case for middle managers and make it and enable them to translate it to the people? Well, I mentioned earlier Microsoft. Here's how we did it for Microsoft. They had the challenge of rolling out a strategy called CPE, the Customer Partner Experience, when Steve Ballmer was CEO. And across Asia, we have many different languages and dialects. So to create a sense of urgency, to create a sense of purpose that our own grandmother would understand, here's how we did it. This poster went up in the back office of every Microsoft in Asia Pacific. And it's an aircraft flying into clouds. And you can see the copy underneath says, flying high today, but notice the dark clouds on the horizon. A short email went out from the regional manager, a lady called Natasha Kwan. 2 weeks later, a second poster went up. Are we losing grip on our customers, or how long before we lose our grip? Again, a very simple image. We had a third poster. At the time, Microsoft were 25 years old. I think now they're just celebrating their 40th. It said, it's a long way up, but only a short fall down. It was suggesting it's taken us 25 years to get to the top, but only a second to fall. We never had to use the third poster. By the end of the second poster, we had created a groundswell of curiosity. People were saying, what do you mean there's trouble just ahead? What do you mean we're losing grip of our customers? And we then were able to roll out Steve Ballmer's strategy across Asia Pacific, where we got immediate traction and acceleration and very successfully executed what was called the customer partner experience. What did we take in the time to do? Create a sense of purpose and create a sense of urgency. So to sum up, we need to translate the senior leader's strategic message into daily actions. That's the role of the middle manager. Now, the next best practice for middle managers that we see across organizations is you have to communicate the right message as staff members listen to you more than their senior managers. So let me talk about communication. Over at East on the compass, what is communication all about? It's not just about communicating what the new strategy is. The business case explains the why, but it's not just about the what, it's more than that. It's really telling not only a strategic story, but communicating consistently through this implementation journey. And today, we don't need to use newsletters anymore or memos. One of the most powerful forms of communication is video. There's a lovely quote from James over at Forrester Research who says, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, 1 minute of video is equivalent to 1.8 million words. So let me ask you another question. What is the goal of communicating strategy? Most people, when I have the chance to ask them this, will say it's all about explaining the strategy. Well, that's a very small percentage of the overall goal. So let me share with you. 15% of the goal is about sharing the strategy. Yes, people need to know what it is, and we're not even good at that. 95% of people in organizations cannot tell you their own company strategy. 95%! If they don't know what the strategy is, how can they ever adopt it? But that's only 15%. 15% of the communication is helping to explain what are the right actions to take. If implementation is all about taking the right action, middle managers have to be communicating and helping people take the right actions. And then, just because people know what to do doesn't mean they'll do it. We all know healthy living is better for us, but do we all do it? So 20% of the communications is about inspiring people to take the right actions. But that's still only 50% of the equation. The biggest chunk and the least practiced is constantly updating progress. Middle managers need to be sharing what's happening, what's not happening, what worked, what happened in one department we can learn from in another, what's the best practice we can share, what is the customer feedback. There has to be a constant flow of information, updates, and progress. And just a quick tip on this one. The more you communicate about the strategy implementation, the less the resistance. Think about that one for just a second. The more you communicate about strategy implementation, the less the resistance. In other words, keep communicating. And as you communicate, our next best practice for middle managers is you must be as a coach. It's not a one-way communication. It's to engage them and inspire them in discussions, in groups, in hearing your people. We've heard it all the time. We know communication is two-way, but yet companies still fail to practice it. And here's a simple example. Let me show you this test. If 1 times 1 equals 1, and 2 times 2 equals 4, and 3 times 3 equals 9, and 4 times 4 equals 20, when you give me feedback, what was the problem with what I just said? Most of you will go, oh, Robin, hang on, 4 times 4 is 16, not 20. You won't say to me and communicate, you got 75% correct, you got 75% taking the right actions, and there's just one area that we need to improve. You immediately, most of the time, people focus on what I got wrong. When you communicate, if you're going to inspire and engage your people, you need to focus on what they do right and balance that with what they can improve. I hope that works for you. And with that number equation, it takes us nicely into the halfway mark, which is measures. Now, wow, I could use my whole time just talking about this one area. It's unbelievable that organizations change their strategy, but they don't change their measures. You have to have inside the organization the right measures to know if the strategy implementation is working. Which means you have to, when you change your strategy, revisit your scorecard. Now, what does that mean for middle managers? What gets measured gets done. Many of us are familiar with the expression. Middle managers have to identify for projects, initiatives that support the implementation at least 5 to 7 key measures that will allow them to track if the team is succeeding. Now, please note, I only said 5 to 7 measures. Don't create the trivial many, create the vital few. Create the vital few measures that will allow you to track if your staff are taking the right actions and if the actions are having the right outcome. And the other benefit of tracking your staff with measures, it holds them accountable. And I cannot emphasize enough that implementation through measurement is about holding people accountable. Middle managers have to follow up. In fact, the #1 best practice of leaders around the world is follow through. Holding people accountable, making sure you do what you say you're going to do. So in the short time I have with you, I'll just give you in a nutshell, very simple way of holding people accountable. And that is that for every strategy objective, you need a measure. Every measure must have an action to take you from the baseline to your target. And every action, people must be held accountable for. And also in this presentation, in this webinar, I've aimed to give you as many quick tips as I can. So here's one more. When you're communicating to people above you, to the senior managers, use the numbers. But when you're communicating downward, use more stories. You have to use both. Some people are more analytical, some people are more right brain and prefer stories. You have to find the right balance, and that one's just a quick tip. Which takes us to south on the compass, which is all about culture. What is the challenge for middle managers around culture? Well, every organization is unique. And the way that you implement your strategy is different to anyone else. What do I mean by that? Two companies can have the same strategy, but how they implement it will always be different. Why? Because your culture is different to anyone else. In an organization, your culture is like your personality. It defines what you do, how you do things, the way you work. And what middle managers need to appreciate is that the culture drives the way you implement. There's a difference, even in the Gulf, between different companies and different organizations in different countries. They're driven by the culture. Some are faster, some are slower, as they are across the world. You have to recognize what impacts your implementation from the culture. And an example of a company we all know of on the negative was, of course, Enron. Enron had a very competitive culture that became its downfall. So, for example, if you were working on your computer and you went to the toilet and you didn't log out, the person next to you in Enron was known to go on to your position as an analyst on the computer and make a call that would be detrimental to your portfolio. In other words, sabotage you on your own computer so that you look bad and the other person looked good. It was that competitive spirit as the culture, which was one small part, to why Enron today is no longer with us. So as we move around the compass, let me talk about process. Now, I've been working in the Middle East for about 15 years, and when I first started talking about process, one of the biggest topics was then Six Sigma and Lean Sigma. Today, we don't even mention the word Six Sigma. It's all about innovation, and it's an exciting time. Today, processes are changing rapidly, and the critical component is that your processes have to support your implementation. When you translate the strategy into the business, you have to look at the way people are working and empower them to make the required changes. And middle managers have to guide people through that empowerment. Now, today, it's an amazing time. We have things like artificial intelligence. So, for example, there's a bank here, DBS, in Singapore, that is shortly about to launch artificial intelligence for its relationship managers that will help the relationship manager recommend positions and to their own clients. There's things today like drones that are changing the way that eBay and Amazon deliver their goods. There's the impact of sensors, where companies like GE are creating $3 to $5 billion new business or new revenue from opportunities created by sensors. We're living at a time of innovation and creativity. But in implementation, the challenge is that when we empower our people, the middle managers must then support them and help them understand what it means. And one of the best ways we can recommend for that to happen is for them to become the project leaders. Middle managers become the project leaders so they can oversee and work with the people and guide them through. Now, as I mentioned, I've thrown in a few quick tips throughout this webinar, and here's one more. When you're looking at your processes, especially when you're doing a project and you're looking at innovation or creativity, don't just ask what should we do different, you must also ask what should we stop doing. Peter Drucker created the term the purposeful abandonment. If you want to grow your business, before you decide where and how to grow, the first thing you need to do is stop doing what's not working and to get rid of the outgrown, obsolete, and the unproductive. Middle managers are responsible. They know what's going on, and they must work with their people to not only create new ideas, new concepts, new ways of doing things, but also get rid of the obsolete and the non-value adding. In other words, best practice, create the space for implementation. When you stop doing the work that's not adding value, you create the space to do the work that is adding value. Which takes us to the penultimate area, reinforcement on the compass. Oh, I bury my head at this at times. So many organizations, they get their people on board, they explain why and how we're going to implement, they change the measures aligned to the culture, synergize processes. And then somebody steps forward and takes the right action and receives zero reinforcement. And when people stick their head out and they don't get any encouragement and reinforcement, they just go back to doing what they were doing before. Implementation is only sustained when you reward and recognize the right actions. The reward system must change. Ignoring it is not an option. You must make sure, as we say in Asia, that the rice bowl, your pay packet, supports and encourages the behaviors and actions that you want to take. And also the non-financial rewards and recognition are there. Which takes us to the final on the compass, which is review. Now, you can start anywhere on the compass. We're working with one company at the moment in India, a conglomerate, and we started with their communications. We're working with another company over in the Gulf, and they started working with their measures. We're talking to another organization, and they're looking to enter from their processes. There is no correct or right starting point. It depends on your organization. But once you get going, you have to constantly review. In most companies, we review implementation unbelievably, maybe once or twice a year. It's not enough. How do you know what's going on? How do you stop small problems becoming big problems? Reviewing once or twice a year is not enough. You have to be reviewing every quarter the whole implementation. And every 2 weeks, smaller components. Every 2 weeks, you've got to be asking your people, are you taking the right actions? What have you done this week to implement the strategy? Where do you need support? What resources do you need? How can I assist you? Have you achieved the desired outcomes? Only by constantly asking questions and getting the feedback do you know that you're achieving. So my final best practice for middle managers is you must constantly feedback to your people and to the seniors. You are the linchpin. And the linchpin not only of the implementation, but that also includes the communication, of the review, of what's working, of what's not, of what we can do differently, sharing both upwards and downwards across the organization. Constant feedback is a critical success for any middle manager rolling out the implementation. So that just leaves me to close out with a couple of slides. These slides, as Rob mentioned at the beginning, will be uploaded and available to you. So I've included a quick summary of the compass for you. And 3 questions to think about. Which direction is the hardest to implement on the compass? Which direction receives the most resistance? And which direction is the least practiced among leaders? Well, the first one is, which direction is the hardest to implement? It's culture. All of them are hard, but culture is the hardest. The second question, which receives the most resistance? It's measurement. The pushback when you try and implement a new measurement system is tremendous. And the third one, which direction is the least practiced among leaders? It's not communications. A lot of people say the least practiced is review. Leaders get caught up and they just simply don't review the implementation. So I look forward to seeing you, those who will be at the conference in 3 weeks' time. If you do see me, please do come up and say hi and let me know that you're on the webinar. It's always lovely when we do have the opportunity to meet up. If you have any questions, then please do post them on the screen and we can answer them. Jerome, who I've known for many years, will do a wonderful presentation. His new book came out last year and he'll be sharing many of the best practices. And Rita has also published her book and she'll be discussing also what's going on. But not only for Jerome and Rita, there'll be many different presentations, discussions in a field that is one of the most exciting. And even though implementation is still in its infancy, there's a lot of opportunity ahead of us. So I leave you with a final riddle. Just to close out, to summarize, what is the role for middle managers in implementation? Here it is. If 5 birds sit on a fence and 3 decide to leave, how many birds are left on the fence? Once again, if 5 birds sit on a fence and 3 decide to leave, how many birds are left on the fence? Some say 0, some say 2, some say 5. 5 birds sit on the fence, 3 decide to leave, how many are left on the fence? 5, because they only decided. Middle managers are the role model for implementation. They are the linchpin. If they're not taking the right actions to drive it through the organization, then the people below them will never have the confidence or get engaged. So it's critical that everyone across the organization is taking the right actions. I wish you all the best on your implementation journey, and thank you for giving me your time to attend this webinar on the role of middle managers in strategy implementation.